The young and prodigious T.S. Spivet. And we have for this the director Jean-Pierre Jeunet. We have the author of the novel, Ray Bledson, producer Frédéric Binon, composer Denis Alacord, and DOP Thomas Hardmeyer. There are eagerly awaiting your questions, so there's a question in the front row. Microphone, please.
Hola, buenos días.
Hi, good morning. Two questions. The first question is, the director has accustomed us to little details, and this film was an excellent example of this. Why do you believe those little details are so important? And the second, how you managed the 3D concept. I'm not too sure whether I've got to repeat. Yes. Okay. As regards to the little details that you've accustomed us to in your films, and this film is a good example. You always say that they're very important. I would like to know why that's something that you like so much. And then managing and handling 3D, how did you manage all of that? And I imagine it was a learning process as well. Yes, well, the details. Well, it's just like in football. Everything comes down to detail. The book by Wraith, that is to say, there's a lot of drawings that supposedly were drawn by T.S. Spivet. When I saw the book and the illustrations and the drawings, I thought the idea of fitting all of them in 3D from the outset, that's the way I saw it. 3D is not there just to make it spectacular, but also for the narration and the poetry, just like I did with Amélie and the special effects. I wanted to renew and use a lot of fantastic American landscapes and also to shoot in English. That's why I shot in 3D. Plus, when I was a child, I had a ViewMaster. You know, those glasses with little discs so that you can see 3D images. They were my first steps in cinema. I was 8 years old. I'd cut and change the order of the images, and that's how I created films that subsequently I recorded and projected and showed my friends. So I already took my first steps in 3D when I was 8 years old. I think your film was fantastic. I would like to say it was like entering into a dollhouse all of a sudden again. And I would like to ask Jean-Pierre Jeunet a couple of things. The first of these is whether this is the first American film, quote unquote, that you've made. And secondly, where did you draw this marvelous child actor? No, it's not my first American film. Prior to this, I did Alien Resurrection with Winona Ryder for 20th Century Fox. That was a true American film, but this was a false American film. And that's very important because obviously it's an American film, but produced in Europe between France and Canada. For me, the most important word in cinema is the word freedom. And for this, I've not made others. Here, for example, in Europe, we've got freedom. We've got the final cut, and that's something which is marvelous. If I exclude Alien Resurrection, when I had to give some concessions, because all of my other films, I've never made any concessions. That is to say, I'm 100% responsible of my films. This makes me feel very proud. So I prefer to make films in Spain because, for example, there's no freedom in... Spielberg and Soderbergh complain because Hollywood, everything is formatted, everything is compulsory. So therefore, we have to follow the law of benefits and profits and money. That is to say, the law of Hollywood. And I made an American film, but with French freedom at the same time. Oh, the young child actor. Well, the boy actor, shall we say. Well, it was very difficult to find him. We had to see 2,000 or 3,000. The casting we carried out in a dozen American and Canadian cities. And I was desperate, and all of a sudden, by internet, this little young boy actor, very small, but he had magic in his eyes. I felt he had something special. So I Skyped him, and he said, I can cry if I have to cry, and plus I can do karate and martial arts and so on and so forth. I'm your T.S. Spivet. I saw so much conviction in him, I said, it's quite clear that he had to play the role. I went to New York, and we did a test audition, and it was formidable. And when you don't make a mistake, when you choose a boy actor, you'll only achieve very good surprises. And so obviously we've got to work very much so that to be sure that he could portray the role. In the rehearsals, I believed that was 10 or 15 or 20% possibilities of going even further. And I discovered that he contributed 60% more than what I expected. He's a boy actor who has a past that I can't talk about. It's very hard. And he's hyper positive at the same time. He's almost like a bright light. He never felt tired. He never complained. He was never negative. I saw him cry once and I thought he was playing the role, but I thought it was a joke because he'd lost, I think, a beetle or something of the nature. And I treated him as if he was a true actor. Just like André Tutu, for example. I compare it to André Tutu because he's got the same technical, he's got the sense of rhythm, he can cry, he's got all of these abilities. He's a true actor. I congratulate you for this, such a beautiful and splendid film. It's one of the first 3D Westerns in history, I could call it. I would like to ask Jean-Pierre, could you talk about the dual aspect in the script between the use of weapons and science, the context of the film? It's a children's film, and I would like to ask you what the production process was like and the soundtrack, how it was composed, because it sounded really great in the film, by the way. How did you go about that? I don't know whether I could summarize, just like Ray Flax, who's the author of the film. Actually, everything was in the book. When I talked to him for the first time, I said, I don't feel I've contributed my personal ideas because your book is so rich and wealthy, I've got to take things out of it. It's not worthwhile anything onto it. Albeit I did add small details. I adapted it a little bit. I couldn't hold myself back. But for me, there were many issues in this book. Those dual aspects between poetry and science, and Yves Luis, this Canadian scientist, I took an idea because he describes forms through poetry or through his chemical composition. I have included that in the film. There's something that's closer to me, which is sincerity. We've got a young boy who draws things, sketches at home, and creates. It's very similar to me. And then at a given moment, he's projected before the media in the front line all of a sudden, and he knows that's not his world. What he prefers to go home and to keep drawing his sketches, and that's the definition of cinema, which is Jean Renoir. I make films for the pleasure of doing so, and then I want people to watch them, and that's what I try to teach my students, to do and make the films you want to and enjoy it just for the sheer pleasure of doing so. Okay? Music, yes, the soundtrack. The question was for me, is that right? Well, Jean-Pierre Jeunet called me up in 2012 in February. The producer, Suzanne Gérard de Marteau, called me to ask me, well, for me to contribute some works for him, because he'd listened to some of my work in MySpace, for example. I like acoustic guitar very much, so therefore there was a fingerstyle work, finger picking, accompanied by a violin. And the director, Jean-Pierre, already knew that extract of my music. And I brought along some other songs to the producer. And I met Jean-Pierre, and he asked me he gave me the storyboard and the script, and he asked me to compose music, promising, well, I couldn't really promise nothing, but I composed the music. Well, how much? Well, I mean, 30 different pieces of work. And Jean-Pierre chose them, and then he edited them with the images at the beginning. And due to co-production issues, I said it would be very good if there were a Canadian musician. And I didn't feel like working with the Canadian musicians who do music for Hollywood. That's not my style. I never use orchestrated music with violins and so on. On the internet, I think that I listened to 500 Canadian composers. All of them, I found one who said, let's compose music. I compose music, and plus I can also change the wheels or the tires on cars at the same time, so I can do both things. So when I found him, I said, well, this is very good. Well, I did. I came to an agreement. I said, I can't promise you anything, but if you want to do, well, I can compose 30 pieces of music, and we'll see. And therefore, I provisionally edited the film so I could be sure in 3D, and at a given moment, I knew that it was going to work at the end of the day. So I was sure that Danny's music was going to work, but he 30 pieces of work in music. His talent, the songs, when you hear it immediately, it sticks to your mind all night long. You can't get it off your mind. Hi, good morning. Congratulations for the film. I liked it very much. I'd like to ask the author of the novel whether you're satisfied with how it's adapted by Jean-Pierre, whether you did you participate in the script at all? And I'd like to ask you about how you directed the actors, the actor and the director. What a challenge, because it's an imaginative story, and you've got to make up these characters which aren't really realistic, are they?
It was a sort of a dream experience for me. When I first wrote the book, I gave my agents 5 directors who I said, I would love to give the book to any of these 5. Actually, Jean-Pierre was one of the 5 directors. I'm not just saying that. It was true.
You told me the first.
The first director, my first choice. But nothing happened at that point, and a couple years went by. And, slowly I had thought, okay, maybe this book will never be made into a movie. And then out of the blue, completely out of the blue, I was, making coffee one morning in my underwear, and I got this email from Jean-Pierre Jeunet. And I thought it was a joke. I thought it was one of my friends playing a joke on me. But no, it was real. And 2 days later, we were sitting across from each other in New York City. And he was telling me all the favorite parts of the book, the little details that he loved. And he kept saying, I'm going to, remember when the boy is on the train and he sees the girl? I will make that you'll see that on the screen. And I felt a little bit like I was on drugs or something. I couldn't believe that this would actually happen. But we got on very well, I think. And we share a lot of similar aesthetics. There's a lot in common. And Jean-Pierre was a big influence on me. I saw Delicatessen, Amélie, and this influenced my work. So in a way, he was inside the book already. And maybe this is what he recognized when he wanted to choose the book. But I was involved a little bit. I didn't really want to be involved too much because I believe that if you write the story, you're too close to it. These characters are too much yours to know how to do the adaptation. I'm fascinated with how adaptation works, but I think for this story, I wouldn't be a good person to. So I was glad to give it to Jean-Pierre, and he trusted me enough to show me the script, and I gave little comments, but nothing major, because I really believe that any story, in order to work, needs a vision behind it. And for this movie, it was my child initially, but then I gave him to Jean-Pierre.
La dirección de actores.
And yeah, the directing of the actors. And how is Jean-Pierre's, yes, the actor, could you please say something there, the actors? Well, all directors probably say the same thing. Well, it all depends upon the casting, that is to say. And Helena Bonham Carter, I thought of her directly when I read the book. I'd already seen her in Fight Club, and she at that time said she'd love to work with me. And I don't know why, when I read the book, I saw her, I got in touch with her, and she said, I fell in love with your script. And that's how easy it was. She accepted immediately. And then there was a casting and an audition with the director Lucie Aubital, who works for Denis Sargon. And it was marvelous to discover actors who are unknown in France, from Toronto, and English, or from Quebec. So therefore, the casting was excellent. Each of the actors are fantastic, even the smaller roles, but the casting, I'm always there, and I test audition everyone, and I think that's the only way to not make a mistake at the end of the day. And vis-a-vis directing on set, well, yes, and there's a very interesting story here, and that's the role of Gypsum, Juliet Davis. And that was a very complicated story. A lot of actors received the script. They said yes, and they said no. And then the American agents, who are the biggest liars on the planet, made us believe that they'd loved the script, but they hadn't even read it. And finally, I sent it to Kathy Bates. You know who she is, obviously. And for 2 months, the agent was saying yes, that he loved her, but she hadn't even read it. End of the day, we decided to write to her. She had heard talk about it, so that when she read it, she said, I love it, I want to play the role, and quite happily, she came along. And when she realized she had cancer, instead of making the film, she had to be operated on, and that's probably saved her life. So therefore, Julie Davis came from Australia at the last minute to play that role. She arrived on a Friday night, and we shot the next Monday morning. So therefore, that's how the directing process is. To be yourself, but make me laugh. And that's what she did.
Character, Tecumseh Sparrow. Why such an Indian name? An Indian-sounding name. I mean, you know, Tecumseh was a famous Cherokee chief.
Yeah.
And the middle name of a famous Yankee general, too.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah, who was named for the Indian.
Exactly.
Well, I love the name. I love names that are initials, like TS, because always, if you say my name is TS or BJ or DD, there's a story there. There's an untold story because always the two initials stand for something. So I like names that have stories behind them. T.S., of course, is a echo of T.S. Eliot, who's one of my favorite writers. But Tecumseh Sparrow is an interesting name. It's about the contradictions that are what the West is about. You know, the American West, on the one hand, is about map makers, cartographers, scientists. It's about the conquest of the Indians, it's about cowboys. It's all these things. It's a real playground of the imagination. There's what's actually happened in the West, and then there's what we believe happened in the West. The genre of the Western was only created after the West was already closed in some ways. The frontier theory, Turner's thesis, which is, the frontier is where America was made, but the frontier is already gone. This was the first real American idea, was a nostalgic idea. It was already told after the fact. So there's something about the West that is nostalgic. We can't help thinking about the West without sort of moaning that it's gone, So I wanted to capture that in that name. Tecumseh, he was this Indian figure who tried to unite all the tribes together and failed and was shot. So there's history in that name, which was important.
Allí atrás.
Right at the back, further back, right there. Hi, congratulations. I would have liked to have had the young boy actor here at the press conference. What projects do you have in your head now, Mr. Jeanette? I've got a problem is that I never know what film I'm going to make next. I need to see what's going to happen with this one first. Obviously, if you're successful now, later on you can be much more ambitious. But if such isn't the case, perhaps we will have to review my pretensions for my next film. And it's very difficult. It's very tough for me to find a subject matter because in ideal terms, I want a good story, good characters, emotion, humor, interesting graphic aspects, and to be original. It's very difficult to find those 5 elements. And I think in this film, I think the 5 elements do exist. I need to love everything I do, but I think that I filled everything I like. And I also need to fall in love with the subject because as I write, and then my films are seen throughout the world, and I've got to promote things, this is 4 years of my life. So that was very important for me to like it because unfortunately, so I can't answer you. I don't know what I'm going to do after this film.
Hola.
Hi. When I saw the film, it seemed to me that I saw scenes that reminded me of Big Fish. I'm not too sure that's the thing of the book, or I've completely invented it. I don't know, or whether it's director's issue. What? Big Fish? You saw Big Fish? You saw Big Fish in my movie? Yes, in The Girl on the Trapeze. Yes, and there are little fish as well. Big Fish, well, perhaps is the only film by Tim Burton that I don't like. I'm sorry to say that, but I love Tim Burton, don't get me wrong. Yes, of course. He's the husband of Helena Bonham Carter.
Tim Burton, Jean-Pierre, Tim Burton, Alfonso Cuarón, who was here, yeah, with Gravity. Who else? Wes Anderson, and Guillermo del Toro. I think it's the 5. It's good, right? Anyone would be good, yeah. And Capra, but he's.
Hace poco.
Just a while back, Hollywood played tribute to French cinema in the invention of Hugo. French cinema also paid a tribute to American film in The Artist. Then Woody Allen shoots Midnight in Paris. Now you make a film which is super American coming from France. So could you tell us what's this recent love story between French and American cinema? What's going on there? Well, it's a love-hate relationship at the same time. But why? Well, because once again, just like I said before in the US, well, but don't relax. My wife's American and I love the US, and I go to San Francisco and I like the American people, but US cinema requires profit and it's a prisoner of its own industry. The Americans say this, not only me, and I claim freedom. I think we've got to do an artist type films, author type films. When a gallery exhibits paintings, the gallery owner can't say to the painter, change here and paint it blue and take the red and don't paint it white. But in cinema it does occur. And for us, for the French people, that's can't be tolerated. So therefore you see that there are two different cultures here. This doesn't mean that the Americans can make excellent films, of course, but it's much more difficult. You've got to fight and fight. It's a big struggle. I've been in Hollywood. I know what it's about. So that's why if I can continue to work in France, that's what I prefer to do. This doesn't mean that I adore American films. The great American Scorsese and so on and so forth. I love them, these directors. Well, recently I reread Renoir's biography in the 30s and 40s. He said there's always going to be that knows better than you what the audience is going to like, and I've got the impression in the 1930s he was already talking about my films. So therefore, this has always been the case.
I also think particularly this movie is in a great tradition of Europeans making Westerns. Some of the best, I think, Westerns came from Europe. I wrote about Montana, but I'm not from Montana. I'm from the East Coast. So I'm a big believer in telling stories about places where you're not from, because it allows you to a certain insight that if you're from there, you don't see, you know? I think this movie is so interesting because it's made by a French director. It was shot in Canada, not even America. So it's seen through many lenses. And in that way, it feels like an America that you have seen, but maybe never have seen. And that's what that effect is that I felt like. I was like watching through a Viewmaster a little bit. You know, you felt like you were watching cinema. And I think that's an important part of it.
Sí, la película va dirigida a...
The question to Thomas, could you please talk about what was the main challenge as a DOP, the director of photography, and whether you had in mind that idea of drawing the greatest amount of effect and image to the depth in the background, which has to do with the 3D technique. Could you talk about that? Above all, it was Jean-Pierre. In our first meeting, as regards to the depth in the background, I said we need a lot of depth in the background because he likes it and because it will work better for 3D to not have close-ups and, for example, that are too blurry. So as regards to the image in the film, what can I say? Well, undoubtedly, it was important to make the grade of the universe of Jean-Pierre's universe. It was important for me to make the grade at the level of his universe. He'd already worked with me, and he'd already searched out the locations. A lot of things had been defined beforehand. So, quote unquote, it was quite easy for me to fit in and to enter and do my work with him, to work with all the decoration and with the lighting. So therefore it wasn't that complicated, because this had an enormous amount of work had been done beforehand, which I can tell you how I chose Thomas. I'd worked with Denis Stangier and Bruno de Bonnel, and de Bonnel was busy because he had done Tim Burton's film and then the film of the Coen brothers. So therefore, if I make another film in the US, my wife was going to divorce me, so I had to find somebody else. There were a lot, but I did, thanks to the internet once again, I saw the presentations of all of the experts in France. There were probably about 400 photographers, and I simply chose the one objectively what I liked the most, whether I knew him or not. So that's why I chose him. This film was presented to the official section to compete. Was that your intention, or was it at the end of the day, it was just a closing, it was just a brilliant film for the closing day of the film festival, because I think it's a film has received the best ovation after it was seen in the official section. And like in previous years, are you just here for the closings, or are you here to compete? Or why is that all about?
Le producteur va vous répondre.
Oui. Bah, je crois que c'est une décision commune entre le...
I think that it's a common decision between the Gaumont company, which is in charge of sales, which has co-produced the film, and the Spanish distributor. And San Sebastian is a great stage, a magnificent shop window. To be here in the closing ceremony, it's an honor for us, albeit we don't enter into the competition. It didn't form part of our objectives to compete. We just simply wanted to do a world premiere here, and La Concha San Sebastian's a great place for this world premiere.
Hola.
Hi, for Jean-Pierre. When you see your films, you see fascinated because you choose great landscapes. What locations, what landscape would you like to deal with in your next film? Whether there's anything in Spain that could fit into those films that you may be making in the future, who knows?
Oui, oui.
What happens is that I prefer urban landscapes more than nature. Nature has something which is frustrating. You can't control it. Nature controls us. The only thing we can do is to try to find the most beautiful landscapes and try to film them with the best light possible. But when there's perspectives or constructions and buildings, that's where you can shoot in a different way. So I felt frustrated shooting nature, and Nadine Baudetot, the decorator, we saw fantastic landscapes, and I said, no, listen. We took a photo, and when we saw it on the computer, all of a sudden it lost a lot. Nature can let you down sometimes as an image. I'm sure that perhaps I might become a bit more urban. I don't think that I'm a director that films nature very much, but the exciting thing is you travel thousands of kilometers. I don't know Spain too much. I can't really tell you, but perhaps, who knows? No, I'm not a spaghetti western here, film a spaghetti western here, but perhaps, I don't know, or maybe, or a French fry western, who has it like, which was shooted here, Sergio Leone, who was my master, by the way.
Me gustaría que hablara sobre...
Yeah, could you talk about Dominique Pinot, who always participates in your films? It's great to see him here. How did you offer him the characters? That is to say, he's a character. Did you say you've got a specific role for you to play, or you say choose the one you want, or how does that work? Yeah. A little while back, Rafe sent me a film. He said Dominique would be great for the hobo, and he said he thought about him also before I thought about him. It was difficult and complicated to do the shoot because Dominique couldn't work because he was in the theater, but he didn't remember. We almost lost it. And then someone would have had to replace him, but we were able to find him for a couple of days. He came from Paris. He shot the following day in the evening, and the day after that, he went to the premiere of his play in Paris. Unfortunately, he speaks very good English, and he studied in the US, so therefore he'd already worked upon his role, and you can see he's perfect. And in one night, we were able to give him his look. But Dominique Pinot, if he appears in all my films, it's not because of superstition or friendship, it's because he always surprises me. So therefore, why? Well, why not have the pleasure of having him in your film, of course?
Felicitaciones.
Congratulations for the film. I want to congratulate you once again for your film. It seems to me it's a beautiful tribute to rural America and the curiosity for science, especially in the times and that, or the given moment in the United States where the deepest America is going through a process, to a certain extent, almost of a lot of religious influence, which I think to be a bit toxic, and the influences, what, from my point of view, mean going towards more inclined towards a very high, strong conservatism. My wife's Texan, and I've been to and I live in Alabama. Wouldn't it be obliged to see this film should be seen in schools in the U.S. That's what I'm trying to say. That's a great idea. A film which is a compulsory film for U.S. schools. A film that's going to have 260 million people watching it, or students watching it. Wraith, I'm not too sure whether you want to add anything.
When I created these characters was making a cowboy who lived in the post-cowboy age. You know, the cowboys are gone, but he still considers himself a cowboy, but is aware of this. Because I think in America, there's, for some reason, the image of the cowboy has persisted. Like one of our previous presidents, who will go unnamed, took on the cowboy image, you know, dead or alive, you know. So I think there's something about it that Americans keep coming back to. But I guess I'm interested in what you're interested in, which is what goes on in rural America. Because I shot a documentary in Texas, and I disagreed with all of the political and social opinions of the people who I were interviewing, but they were the nicest people that I had ever met. They invited me into their home, they fed me, much more nice than people in New York, you know? So there was this kind of contradiction. On the one hand, you disagree with them politically, but on the other hand, they are incredibly warm. And I wanted to try to get at that in the community of Montana that was there. And also in the family, you see a contradiction. You see the cowboy who doesn't say very much, on one hand, married to a scientist. And those two forces are also at work in the American West. You know, it's a place of science, and it's also a place of bronc busting and wrangling. So, yeah.
¿Más preguntas, por favor? Allí.
Any further questions?
I'm from Norway, and I'm just wondering, because your name, Ralph Larsen, it's very Norwegian. Do you have any Norwegian roots, or out of curiosity?
Yes, I do. Yeah, my father is here. He's no, my grandfather actually is Norwegian, and he escaped during World War II across the Atlantic on a 30-foot boat, a very small boat, to New York City. It's an amazing story, and actually, my new book has part of that story in there. So I'm, you know, I think I came from interesting stories, I guess, and I'm interested in people who are out of place, who move across borders and oceans. So, yeah.
Yeah, because as well, I wanted to ask, how did you come up with this figure of T.S. Spivet? Can you say something about how did you invent him?
Yes, okay, so, I mean, writing a novel is always complicated. There's many, it's not like I know what I'll write. For me, a lot of times I have to write, and as I write, I learn about the story. But for this book, I was struggling with this character who was dealing with his past on a ranch. So it's the same kind of thing, this nostalgia for the West. Originally, when I first wrote this book, T.S. was 45 years old, and he was drunk and actually living in a prison in Paris and sort of narrating his past from the prison. And I wrote about 10 pages of this, and it was really bad, total shit. So I had to... Part of being a writer is knowing when what you write is very bad. So I threw this out, and I said, no, he's not 45, he's not drunk, he's not in a prison. He's 12, and he's still on the ranch, and struggling with his father, who is very different than him. And once I made that decision, I found the voice of T.S. I was immediately inside the character of T.S. And what I love about this movie, I think, is that it also gets inside his head. You feel his struggle, and you feel his sense of wonder, and also his grief for his brother, and I think that's what carries the book, and it's also what carries the movie.
Further questions, please?
Any further questions? Any further questions? Nobody? Thank you very much to all of you.